Good evening, everyone. I now call to order the meetings of committees of council for October 1st, 2024. We'll begin with the roll call of members. Mr. Harris.
Mr. Ahmed. Mr. Royo.
Here.
Mr. Glees.
Here.
Ms. Craig. Ms. Diaz.
Here.
Mr. Hirsch.
Here.
And President Baker.
Here. Councilors Ahmed and Craig are excused this evening. Just a few reminders for folks joining us at this meeting. I'll ask that you please take a moment to silence your phones or devices if you haven't done so already. This meeting and its participants are being recorded this evening. Tonight we have meetings of committees of council. There are no general public comment periods during this meeting. However, each committee chair will call for comments from the public for specific agenda items. Those comments are limited to 3 minutes per speaker and must begin with your name and block of residence for our meeting record. We will begin with the approval of the September 3rd, 2024 Council Committee meeting minutes.
Motion to approve?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any council comments on the minutes? Hearing none, Mr. Harris.
Mr. Royo.
Aye.
Mr. Glees.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz.
Aye.
Mr. Hirsch.
Aye.
And President Baker.
Aye. All right, that takes us to our first committee, Personnel. Councilor Klixt.
Thank you, Madam President. The Personnel Committee has 3 items on the agenda for tonight. The first item is the nomination of James Archer Abbott for appointment to the Public Art Advisory Board. And I think Mr. Abbott is here tonight. Would you please come forward?
If you don't see the green button, just make sure that's turned on.
Can you hear?
Yeah, there we go.
Yes.
Yeah, good evening, Mr. Abbott. Thank you for being here tonight. And would you please introduce yourself to council and tell us why you want to serve on the board?
I'm a new resident to Lancaster. I'm newly appointed over the last 3 years, actually, as the Executive Director for Wrights Ferry Mansion and the Louise Diamond Von Hess Foundation in Columbia, Pennsylvania. And I've moved here, just a block away, less than a block away. I have a career of over 35 years in museums and in both historic houses and city art museums. I've worked closely with students, artists, other educators in making sure that art, contemporary art as well as historical art, has a value and an importance and an appreciation in daily life. And a good deal of my time, near 20 years, in Baltimore was spent really trying to break down the invisible barriers that exist between the community at large and what would be deemed the cultural institutions. So, and working with not only undergraduate and graduate level artists, for instance, but also giving students within the public schools the opportunity to wear the hat of the curator and to have the vaults thrown open and to have them explore the idea of researching objects, comparing and contrasting objects, and creating maybe a counterpoint for the purpose of an exhibition, for creating a new dialogue, a new appreciation. And I hope that I can offer similar opportunities or be invested in similar opportunities here.
Mr. Abbott, what made you decide to join the board of Public Art Advisory?
It was actually a former student of mine from Johns Hopkins University who is involved in this community and who felt that my voice would be of benefit to the community.
Is there anything specific you would like to achieve during your term on the board?
I would like to see, I'd like to see art again become more part of the daily life of the community. And one of the interests I have is in looking at how public spaces have been developed recently and are being developed for Lancaster. And but whereas looking at the opportunities for the average Joe to be able to create in that space. So the idea of portable or mobile artist tables or easels where people could actually draw, write, or they could be promoted as traveling around the city. Much like the pianos that we see here, and then you're walking late at night and suddenly you hear someone, you hear musical notes, and your mood just changes dramatically. Well, giving people the opportunity to actually create at an easel that otherwise wouldn't be there, giving them an opportunity to express himself, herself. I think it's very important, and I don't think that we quite have that opportunity on a regular basis.
Are there any questions from other members of the committee? Please, Councilor Hirsch.
Thank you, Councilor Cleese. James, first I want to say thank you so much for your interest in serving on this board. I actually currently serve as the council representative on the Public Arts Advisory Board, and I just thought you had a very compelling reason to want to join. Particular, I know one of the things that we've been talking a lot about is developing artists here in Lancaster City and connecting them to opportunities to develop and grow their careers as artists. And so, not to put you on the spot here or anything, but I'm curious if, given your background and experience in the institutional, you kind of mentioned cultural institutions, if you see any opportunities for partnership, with any of the local institutions and our local artists here in Lancaster.
Well, I'm going to touch upon my time in Baltimore. I was there long enough in the city of Baltimore, which I imagine you're familiar with, that I had been through 2 or 3 waves of different directors for the Walters and for the Baltimore Museum of Art. And if one director wanted the art museum to celebrate regional artists, that their replacement, their successor would be, they want to recreate the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the Mid-Atlantic. And then it would go back to regionalism, then it would go back to, it would be a constant trade-off, but it never really helped the arts community at large. I'm hoping that there will be opportunities to look at artist residencies that are actually investments of not just the city, but investments of business, investments of other cultural institutions. I mentioned Wright's Ferry Mansion and Louis Steinman von Hess Foundation. And although we are born of a house that was built in 1738, that doesn't mean that we can't celebrate or invite a contemporary artist or poet or musician to take a role for 6 months or a year at our historic property, and then hopefully developing a relationship that then when maybe it's every 2 years we would have the opportunity to make such an award, and it could be the next time it could be a painter, the next time it could be a sculptor. Art, we are inspired by what we see, and an artist is inspired by what comes before. And I think that there is certainly opportunity here with the cultural institutions that we have, with the businesses that we have. We just have to become a little more, perhaps aggressive, a little more creative.
In the spirit of doing things. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Councilor Hirsch. Are there any other questions or comments from Council? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Abad, for your willingness to serve.
Great.
Thank you.
For your time. Thank you.
Now, I'm going to make a motion to move this nomination to our next full council meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the next items we have on the agenda for tonight in the Personnel Committee are the nomination of John McQueen and the nomination of Claudia Gladamis for reappointment to the Public Art Advisory Board. Those individuals have served on the board for some time, and their terms are expired, and they have expressed their interest in serving, in continuing to serve on the board. Are there any questions, comments from members of the committee, from council? So I'll make a motion to move these nominations to our next council meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Madam President. That concludes the personnel committee.
Thank you very much, Councilor Cleese. Great, we will move to our next committee meeting this evening, which is public safety. The chair is Councilor Diaz.
Yes, we have one in the agenda today. It's the Administration Resolution 69, 2024, authorizing an application for the Fire Justice Grant funding. Lancaster City and the county agreed to allocate the JAG funds of $44,313 to the city police for digital intelligence software and ballistic barriers. The city will submit the application and sign an agreement with the county on the funds that are used. And we have one representative from the police, so if anybody from the committee has any questions, we can bring him up and he can answer them. Anyone from council?
Councilor Diaz, good evening. How are you this evening?
I'm well, ma'am. How
Thank
are
you
you?
for joining us.
You're welcome.
This is one I know that comes up annually. Could you give us a brief overview of how, I know this has to do with the county. Can you just give us an overview of how those are reimbursed to us?
Yeah, so this is, it's a grant that's only applies to certain entities, and the county applies to that. Within the county, we are the only agency that meets the criteria to be awarded that. So this is, it's been a yearly grant that we've done for as long as I can remember, that goes to the county and then passes through the county to us to utilize.
Thank you. I could not remember exactly why that was,
Yeah.
but I appreciate your clarification.
Any other questions? And just to make it clear, they do allocate it, which is 100% to the city, just in case anybody has questions about that.
That's correct.
Any questions from the public? With that, I'd like to move this into full council on October the 8th, 2024.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Have a good
And
evening.
that's all we have for the agenda for public work. For safety.
Thank you, Councilor Diaz. Excuse me. Our next committee meeting this evening, I can say words, is Community Planning Committee, and that's going to be Councilor Craig.
Thank you, Council President. We have 3 items on the agenda this evening, and they are the local account shares applications. One is from, give me 2 seconds. One is from City Properties, Cross City Properties Partners with a Purpose, and the other is from Lancaster Housing Authority. And
The first 2.
we're gonna do them together?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, the local shares grants authorizing the city to make application on behalf of these 2 organizations. Neither one of them are supposed to exceed the amount of $1 million, and they are to renovate properties at Church Street Towers and Farnham East, and several houses. I think it was up to 33 houses throughout the city. Now, is there anybody here from the Housing Authority and Partners with Purpose?
Can I just sneak in and just give a little bit more of background on the local shares accounts? You all have seen these before. This comes up about annually. So these are grants that come through the state, but they need to come to a municipality and then on to the subgrantees. So we are working with the Housing Authority as well as Partners with Purpose for these grants.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, President Bakay, members of council, Mayor Sirachi. We're here this evening. We handed out some information to all of the council members on what we're trying to do, and we're happy to answer any questions. Just to give you an overview, well, first let me introduce myself. My name is Barbara Wilson. I'm the Executive Director for the Lancaster City Housing Authority. I also serve as the President of Partners with Purpose, our nonprofit subsidiary of the Housing Authority.
Good evening. I'm Beth Detz, the Deputy Director of the Lancaster City Housing Authority. Keep going.
So for Resolution 7024, it entails Susquehanna Court and Franklin Terrace. Those are our family sites. And in your packet, you will see the amount of units in each of those sites. And basically, all of the applications that we're submitting to the state will be for facade improvements. At the Housing Authority, as you know, we get some funding from HUD, we get other fundings from other sources. Most of our funding goes to health and safety, so first and foremost, it's infrastructure. And so it's things like heating and cooling and safety with fire suppression and all those things. We never have money to be able to improve the facades. So at Franklin Terrace and Susquehanna Court, you can see the date of their inceptions. And while we've never done anything to the facades at Franklin Terrace, the last time we did any facade improvements at Susquehanna Court was actually in the 90s. So this grant will enable us to beautify and change the looks of those facades, and we've included some pictures in your pamphlets to show that. The same thing with our towers at Church Street and Farnham Street East. Anybody that drives up North Duke can look at the building at Farnham Street East. While we're doing some major improvements inside, making units more accessible, and we've completed a new entryway. We've done apartments over. We've done a new elevator. We've put on a new roof. We have not been able to do anything to facade. And so this grant, with your blessing, would help us. The application that we put in for this grant will help us to improve the outside of that building. As you know, Willow Street's been building a brand new tower called Mosaic, which is, everybody's seen the renderings for that. And we just feel as though, we want our building to look as good as well. So these monies will help us do that.
So, I think Tina might be, in any event that they get the grant, what would be the timeline on the grant?
I am not exactly sure. I think the last one was about 3 years, but you can extend these grants too, so there's a little bit of wiggle room in them.
Okay. Are there any questions from the committee?
Thank you, Councilor Gray. Thank you for the overview about the project. And could you please describe a little bit the outcomes of the project?
I'm sorry,
The outcomes,
the outcomes?
Yes.
Well,
And sorry to interrupt you, what would that mean for the community?
so definitely brings an upgrade to the southeast area where these buildings are located. And like I said, our Farnham Street East Tower building is a major focal point in the intersection of Farnham Church and Duke Streets. So upgrading the facade of that building will greatly enhance the southeast area.
And
That is the outcome, not only for the residents in our buildings, but also for the community, the neighborhood itself.
And do you see any potential problems that could happen unexpectedly, and how would you guys
Well, I can't foresee any problems. I hope there wouldn't be. We'll definitely go out, as you look at the last page, we're definitely going to go out and make sure we have, work with an engineer and an architecture drawings and all of that before we start anything to get the pricing. So it might be something that, depending on the cost and depending on if we receive the grant, depending on what we're allocated, it may be something, depending on which site it is, it may be something that has to be done in phases. I'm not sure yet on that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
No further questions, Councilor Legway. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from the committee?
If I may. In regards to the renovation, hoping to get to that phase, who are the actual contractors that will be doing this? Is it a local contractors? Are they union contractors?
So we'll have to do the work in what is presented by the grant. So we always try to work locally. We do work locally. And we will have to stay within the confines of what the grant requires. But typically at the Housing Authority with HUD rules and regulations, we always have to work with union wages and within certain guidelines. So we're not new to that. And we typically work with local if we can. But again, that's far down the road. We get the grant, and then we put it out to bid with an architect and engineer, and then they go out for bids to local contractors, and whoever comes back to bid, that's who we, try to use, for sure.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from council as a whole?
Hi. My question is, it sounds like these are, grants are always set to not to exceed $1 million, but do you already have a budget for each of these projects drawn up, or will that come after the grants may be awarded?
We do not. So it would be a situation where once the grants are awarded, then we will find out, what the budget is from there, and then plan accordingly.
Thank you.
Within the confines of the grant, of course.
Are there any questions from the public?
Just following up on President Bakay's question, will grants be the only source of funds, or could you potentially bring in additional funds?
We would potentially then go after, depending on the cost, total cost, we would go after other funding sources.
Are there any further questions from the public?
And Councilor Craig, I apologize, I talked about both resolutions, so for the City Housing Authority.
I'll make a motion to move Resolution 70, 2024, and 71, 2024 to full council on the 8th, I think it is.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
So then Partners of Purpose.
Start again.
Yes, Partners with Purpose. And my understanding that this is the local shares that will get funding for a grant for 15 to 33 houses to be rehabbed, both on the inside and outside?
No, this is also facade improvements.
Are there any questions from the committee?
If I may, Councilor Director. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Just one question. I know there's 515 Church Street specifically mentioned here. Is this property going to be on hold until these monies essentially?
No, so this is just to show you before and after. So 515 Church Street is one of the houses that we completely renovated that was inhabitable when Partners of Purpose purchased 95 single-family homes throughout the city from the Lancaster City Housing Authority. So this is just to show you what a house can look like after we make substantial improvements. So the house at 515 Church, the before pictures, you can see it was a house that on the outside was in pretty bad shape. In the inside, we had a squatter, we had a potential fire, someone tried to start a fire in there, we had copper stolen. So we went in there, and with monies from ARPA, from Home Dollars, and CDBG funding, we were able to completely renovate 4 single-family homes that were inhabitable before that time. So this is just a picture to show you what the front of a facade of the house can look like after we receive the monies to be able to do that.
Gotcha. And my apologies, I just noticed the before and after.
No problem.
Thank you for the explanation. That's all I have, Councilor Craig.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the public on this?
I have a question, Councilor.
Go ahead.
In regards to after they're rehabbed, are these going to be sold or are
No.
they going to be rented?
These are still rentals.
And
And these are houses that we're able to do mixed use, but they all have to fall into certain income levels and requirements that have to be made. So they're still affordable at different levels of affordability.
so they're not generally going to be at market price?
No,
So, okay, so basically the structure, it could vary. Is that correct?
but within the rental parameters of the Lancaster County, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions from the committee or council as a whole?
Just a quick question. Apologies if I missed this. How do you go about identifying the houses that receive these I guess sub-grants, so up to the 30,000?
Yes. Out of the 95, we're going to pick out depending on the funding, so we get enough funding for 15 houses to 33 houses, wonderful, and then we're going to do the worst ones.
Are these city housing authority properties, or are they?
No, these are our nonprofit partners with purpose. 95 with 30, there'll be houses throughout the city of Lancaster. So if you look on the first page, you can see the locations that vary, which is all over the city.
Okay, so these are already part of the partnership, in other words.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so just to give a little context, we want these houses, even though they're affordable rents, we want them to be just as nice as any other house on the block. So we want them to blend in, and you can't write by and say, oh, that's a Section 8 house, or that's a low-income house, or they will be just as nice as any other house on the neighborhood. That's our goal.
Thank you.
I have one more question.
Sure.
So are the majority of these properties in the southeast or are they scattered along?
They're scattered all over the city.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep, you're welcome.
Are there any questions from the public? Can you come to the podium?
Just for the sake of being able to be heard, particularly on the live stream as well,
I apologize.
we should yell at Tim the same way.
With the partners, with purpose, do you have a regular maintenance program for all of the properties? And how can I find out more about that?
Oh, absolutely. So I didn't bring my cards with me, but
I'll seek you out.
sure, I would love to talk to you about it. So, great question, because one of the unique things we did with Partners with Purpose is because the Lancaster City Housing Authority has over 75 years of maintaining, as well as property management, we have hired them to continue to maintain these 95 scattered sites on behalf of Partners with Purpose. So that enabled us not to have to lay anybody off or no staff changes, that they stayed with these houses and they continue to maintain them. And the big reason for creating Partners with Purpose initially was because these 95 scattered site houses, we just weren't getting the funding to be able to maintain them in the way they should have been. So in making this nonprofit, we were able to go after different funding sources that we cannot as a public housing authority.
Thank you. Are there any further questions?
Thank you, Tim.
Tim Stuhler, One United Lancaster, just curious if the sites are all occupied or nearly so.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
The scattered sites, are they all occupied, mostly occupied?
All mostly occupied. I think we have 2 vacancies right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Barb, can you just repeat that into the microphone, because I think that's really significant?
We have 2 units that we were able to get funding, so we're going to rehab those. So those are vacant because we're getting ready to do some major rehabilitation to those. But all the other units, houses are occupied. We have 2 vacancies that I think one of them that we're so proud of. So 515 Church, we have a veteran voucher holder that's going in there with her family, so she'll be moving in there in November. So we're just really ecstatic about that. She'll be getting a brand new renovated house, and then we'll be down to 1 vacancy. So just in our world, that's a great number.
Great. The gentleman that came up earlier, could you come to the podium? Mr. Abbott? Okay. So just for the record, I just wanted you to state your name and...
James Archer Abbott.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott.
He was our personnel committee in the beginning.
Okay, fine.
And that's okay.
Yeah, I was running late. Thank you. I'll make a motion to move Resolution 72 to full council on the 8th.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council President. That concludes community planning.
Thank you, Councilor Craig. We will now move to our Finance Committee. That is Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you, Council President. We have one item on the agenda this evening. Is the overview of the proposed 2025 city budgets. We have Director Campbell here tonight joining us to give council a presentation on those on the overview. Director Campbell. Oh, and Mayor Sirachi, special guest.
I'll just stand here at the podium while Tina gets set up with her presentation. Perhaps for the first time in the city's history, 2 general fund budgets are being presented for council consideration, a regular budget and a home rule budget, in addition to the water, sewer, stormwater, and solid waste and recycling budgets. This may also be the earliest that we have ever introduced the entirety of the city's budget for council consideration. There has and will continue to be a lot of conversation about home rule leading up to the election on November 5th, 2024, and the ballot question. While the home rule charter does not and will not ever set a tax rate, it would allow flexibility in how we pay for essential services in the city of Lancaster. The charter, if passed, would also increase transparency and accountability relative to the budget process. The 2 versions of the general fund do not have significant differences in terms of expenditures. They are both balanced. Both include reductions in operating expenses, and both are higher than last year. The vast majority of expenses driving budget increases are pension and healthcare costs. Both will propose a tax increase, either a property tax increase or an increase in earned income tax, if the home rule charter is adopted. The regular budget includes an 8% real estate tax increase. The home rule budget proposes raising the earned income tax rate by 0.3%. We are also exploring a scenario, which Director Campbell will walk us through, that raises the earned income tax rate by 0.5% to avoid the need for additional property tax increases over the next 10 years. There are no proposed fee increases in water or stormwater. There is a proposed 10% increase in solid waste and recycling that mirrors the increase in tipping and hauling fees, and a 12% increase in sewer fees. Please note that all of these recent fee increases in these funds are driven by external costs. Another difference this year is that we will be presenting a comprehensive capital budget that encompasses the general fund as well as the 4 enterprise funds: water, sewer, stormwater, and solid waste and recycling. The process of preparing the capital budget has been a multi-year effort that will accurately reflect the future needs of the city's infrastructure, as well as considers the regulatory and largely unfunded federal mandates, most especially related to water, sewer, and stormwater. The scope and scale of investment needed relative to maintain our existing infrastructure and to respond to federal mandates is breathtaking. I am deeply concerned about water affordability for our customers, most especially in the city, in the future. During the remainder of my time as mayor, I will continue to advocate with state and federal governments to elevate these concerns. With that, I present the 2025 proposed budgets and mark this historic occasion. Home Rule offers a new way forward that could bring less frequent property tax increases and greater transparency to the budget process. I am eager to see the outcome of the November 5th Home Rule ballot question, and as always, I appreciate the partnership with City Council to craft a budget that meets the needs of our residents and is fiscally sound. And with that, we are moving right along from my annual budget address into Tina's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. This is definitely a unique year. So usually the budget address has about a week or two in between before we give the presentation, but you get about 30 seconds instead. I am grateful to be here tonight. I want to just say really quick before I start that this budget process, particularly creating 2 budgets, does not happen alone. And so there's a whole team of people that have been working on this, and 2 of them are here tonight: Michelle Bush, our Bureau Chief of Accounting and Finance, and Sharon Allenspan, our Bureau Chief of Human Resources, who have been putting in a lot of work for this. So thank you to both of them, and everybody else, but them in particular. So I wanted to just give a real quick synopsis of the kind of calendar of events for the budget this year, because it's so different than past years. So obviously tonight, we heard the mayor's address, budget address. We will see this overview. This is a very kind of 30,000-foot high-level overview this evening. And then on October 12th, so in a little over a week and a half, we will have our budget hearing, our all-day budget hearing. That is a public meeting. I was going to encourage all of the public to attend that, so hopefully there are some listening on the live stream, and please come to that meeting. Then after Election Day, so after November 5th, we'll have the results of the vote on Home Rule. So we will have a second Finance Committee meeting. That will be happening on November 14th, and that will include just one budget at that point to talk about whichever one we'll be moving forward with after election. Because we are in this year still under the requirements of the third-class city code, we can't officially introduce the ordinance for the budget until November 26th. So we'll be doing that then and follow the normal cadence at that point for voting on those ordinances. All right, so many of these things Mayor Sirachi already touched on in her address, but I wanted to give just a few highlights and then dig a little deeper in the following slides. So first, 2025 is the last year that we will actually be able to use ARPA funding as part of our revenue replacement. And so we're proposing that we use the remaining $3.4 million in ARPA funding, and this is in both budgets. This is a reduction from the $6 million that we were allocated in 2024. So we've obviously been working to find ways to decrease costs, but we also need to increase revenue, as the mayor said. So I guess I should say I will be referring to the budget that would be taking place if the home rule charter doesn't pass as the regular budget, and then the home rule budget is the one if the charter passes. So those are my references this evening. So for the regular budget, we're proposing an 8% increase in real estate taxes. This is 1 millage rate. And just to mention a little bit, because of the strong economy that we are currently experiencing, demand for some of the services in the city continues to grow. So actually, some of the earned taxes or earned fees, are also increasing, which is great. That's a revenue stream for us. That's service fee income. We're going to have more details on that on Saturday. The earned income tax revenues continue to grow in the regular budget as well as the home rule budget. We'll get to the home rule piece in just a minute, but earned income taxes have grown up by about 5% each year. And so those you'll see are increasing in the regular budget as well as in the home rule budget. And that's just by the natural fact of incomes increasing in the city. On the expense side, as always, we see increased expenses in our pension and medical costs, as well as salary increases for all of our bargaining units. And then just to note, we have seen reduced costs in 2024. We'll talk about some of the reduced costs that we're looking at in 2025, but these are mainly in staff decreases. So really around staffing positions that have been vacated through retirement or voluntary resignations. So it's resulting in a flat budget from 2024 to 2025 if you take out the increases in pension, medical costs, and the required salary increases. For the home rule budget, the main difference, really the only difference on the revenue side, is the earned income tax or the proposed tax increase. And so we're not proposing a real estate tax increase for home rule. We're proposing a 0.3% earned income tax increase. Other revenues, most of the expenses remain the same. In home rule, we're proposing slightly fewer staff decreases than the regular budget. The regular budget will include some cuts that may slow services in some areas, and so we're hopeful that the home rule budget will allow us to keep those expenses in so that we can keep the standard of services where they are currently. And much of tonight's focus is really going to be on the general fund, what we refer to as the general fund, but we do have 4 other funds that we work with. And again, Mayor Sirachi mentioned these this evening as well. These are called enterprise funds. So it's the water fund, the solid waste and recycling fund, the sewer fund, and the sewer or wastewater fund, and the stormwater fund. For the water fund, we're not anticipating any rate increases within the city. We are working on a Public Utilities Commission rate case, which we're planning to submit for in the first quarter of 2025, and that would affect residents outside of the city. So it doesn't affect people that live in the city, but it would be potentially an increase for folks outside of the city. The solid waste and recycling fund, the trash fund, this is seeing a cost increase about 10%. It's about $8 per quarter. And again, as the mayor mentioned, this is really due to the hauling and tipping fees that we continue to see increasing. For the sewer budget, again, this was mentioned just a few minutes ago. We're proposing a 12% rate increase for this. That's resulting in about $525 on average per month extra for residents. We're going to be talking more about this on October 12th, but there are some capital requirements that are causing some of these increases. And then for the stormwater fund, we're not proposing any rate increases this year, and I will say that the stormwater fund has remained, again, relatively flat from last year. So we're really grateful to our Deputy Director of Sustainability and Environment for helping us in that piece. So looking at the combined operating budgets from all 5 enterprise funds, or from all 5 funds, the general fund and 4 enterprise funds, operating budgets are approximately, in the regular budget, $157.4 million. And then for the home rule budget, it's about 158.6 million. So it's about 1.2 million more in home rule than in regular. And as I mentioned at the beginning, well, I think I mentioned this at the beginning, but you can see it here, the enterprise funds show very minimal difference. And this is, I'll just go back here. Did I go back? There we go. So you can see here from the regular fund, from the regular budget, the enterprise funds are anything that's not red on this. You can see very little change. So really the only fund that is really affected by the home rule charter will be the general fund. There are some very small effects in the enterprise funds, but that's really around shared staffing. So some of the staff positions are shared between the funds, and some of those are overlapping. So those are the small differences that you'll see. All right, so the remaining pieces of the presentation tonight are only going to focus on the general fund. As I mentioned earlier, we'll hear more about these four funds on October 12th. So for the general fund, this chart shows the breakdown of our revenue in the regular budget. So the largest portion of the fund comes from property taxes. Again, it's that red portion there. This is about 46% of the full budget. And this 46% includes the tax increase that we're proposing, that 8%. I'm going to talk more about earned income tax soon, so I'm not going to mention that as much right now. I'll just talk about a couple of the other areas in here before I move on. Pilot payments are payments in lieu of taxes. These payments come from nonprofits who own real estate in the city and therefore as a nonprofit aren't required to pay taxes. And about 30% of the properties in the city fall into this category. The real estate transfer tax and the local services tax, we have pulled out here because I want to talk about these a little bit more in detail later on. But just wanted to note that these two taxes make up only about 4% of our total budget. I mentioned ARPA already, and you can see that on the bottom of this. And then I also just want to note that there isn't a category this year for the fund balance reserve that's showing at 0. We really worked to not use any cash reserve to balance the budget this year. So neither of the budgets will have that proposal in it. For home rule, the only difference in revenue between the regular budget and the home rule budget are the real estate tax revenue and the earned income tax revenue. And so as you compare these slides, the earned income tax is the larger black section at the bottom. That's the regular budget, and that's the home rule budget. The earned income tax increase in the regular budget is not an increase in taxes. So as I mentioned, it's simply an overall income growth in the city. But for the home rule budget, you will see more earned income tax because we're proposing an increase in that tax. So I want to talk a little bit more about the revenue because we will be talking about the expenses in more detail on October 12th. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes looking at a couple of different revenue categories. The first is the real estate taxes. I'm sure you have seen this slide before. I think all of you have been through a budget presentation before. But this is a look at our assessed values of real estate. So as you can see, the chart shows very little change in property assessments in the city from year to year. 2018 was the last time the county implemented a reassessment, so you can see where that's pointed out. And since that time, the city's overall tax base has really only grown about 1.5%. And just as a reminder, again, this is the only tax that the city currently can increase or can change. Everything else is capped under our third-class city code. The real estate transfer tax. So there have been some questions around this tax during the home rule process, so I wanted to show this as well. This slide shows the real estate transfer tax, which is a tax when a property is sold. We split this tax with the school district, so this is just our portion of the tax. This, along with the earned income tax, which we're going to look at next, are generally pretty good indicators of a healthy economy. The real estate transfer tax tends to ever so slightly increase or stay the same in a healthy real estate market, and you can see this playing out generally on this slide. So you can note in general, since 2016, things are moving up or sort of staying the same, but you can see three outliers there. 2018, which is eventually going to roll off of this, but that's when Park City was sold, so about half of that year came from that Park City sale. And then 21 and 22, as you know, were times when there was really low mortgage interest rates and a high push for property sales, and so that was happening much more at a national level, and that has since slowed down and kind of gone back to the general trend. And a final note on this, as I mentioned already, real estate transfer tax is a very, very small portion of our budget. It makes up about 1.9% of our overall revenue. And so this tax can be adjusted should a home rule charter be adopted, but we're not proposing any adjustment. With the contribution being such a low portion of the overall budget, the city won't see significant benefit to any sort of increase in this, and we recognize that we want to continue to encourage a healthy real estate market. The next two slides, we'll talk about earned income tax. So this is going to show the difference in revenue projections really for this year. So again, just as a review, earned income tax is capped at 0.6%. Now that's our portion of the earned income tax. The school District of Lancaster also has a portion. So the total amount right now paid in earned income tax is 1.1%. This slide shows a very encouraging trend upwards based on overall increases in income. And obviously, as I've been mentioning, we can't change this because it is capped. So this is showing, again, for the regular budget, again, not proposing any tax increase because we can't, but just natural attrition there. And then this is showing what would happen with the home rule budget. So again, a 0.3% earned income rate increase would give a pretty significant bump in income to the city. It's about $4.7 million. Okay, looking a little bit at expenses, we have a couple of different graphs to show this, and wanted to start with this one. I wanted to look at the breakdown of general fund expenses against our general fund revenues. So you can see here our biggest expenses are in public safety. These total about 56% of our budget, with between police and fire. And those are, they're labeled there at the bottom in the red and gray. And then if you look at the top, red and gray, those are our two largest revenue categories, real estate tax and earned income tax, and they make up about 57% of our revenue. So basically used up to support our public service. And again, that was the regular budget. This is the home rule, and I will just switch back and forth between the two. You can see that the real difference is in the property tax and earned income tax at the top. There's not significant difference in the expense. Not even significant enough actually to change the percentages unless we would go at another decimal point. So for the regular budget, here's a slightly different look at the expense categories. This is showing the breakdown of our different departments. So after public safety, after police and fire, the next largest category of general expenses is the category which holds pension, medical, and debt expenses. This is 17% of our total budget. This category also includes a very small amount of funding for organizations like community-involved organizations like the library or Lancaster Rec. That amounts to only 5% of the total of that category. So 5% of the 17% goes into those community organizations. And I'm pointing those out tonight only because those contributions will vary a little bit between the regular budget and the home rule budget. The other categories of the budget include the remaining departments, and you can see those there. And again, with home rule, the changes are not significant. I will point out a couple of differences tonight, but then you'll hear more about them when the departments present on October 12th. So as I just mentioned, we are proposing a reduction in community contributions in the regular budget and not as much of one in the home rule budget. We recognize the importance of these community organizations, but we did feel like it was necessary to pull that out more in the regular budget. As I mentioned earlier, we're including in the home rule budget some expenses in each department, mainly in staffing, to ensure that we don't have to cut back on response times or other portions of our service. We are removing some technology from the regular budget that we want to include in the home rule budget. One example is a new report management system for the police department. They're kind of cobbling together their report system right now, and we're hoping for a system that can have a bit more accuracy and efficiency for them. And then one final note, the home rule budget includes a small increase in some of the legal expenses because there will be a large amount of work writing the administrative code for the home rule charter. And because those expenses are directly related to home rule, it obviously wasn't necessary to include those in the regular budget. I'll spend just a little bit of time on this slide. Hopefully you don't look at this and think that it's showing something contrary to what I've been saying, but I did want to note this a little bit. So the departments have worked really hard to keep operating expenses the same or lower than last year. The other three expenses in their categories in this side, salaries, benefits, and debt service, are really not within the department's control. Those obviously have some outside factors happening. So the operating expenses really are the piece that the departments have been looking at. And I've been saying that this is staying relatively flat, but it looks like from this slide that it's actually increasing. So I just want to take a minute to talk about that. So for the past few years, we've been dividing all of our treasury costs and our IT costs, so all of our utility billing and real estate billing costs across all 5 funds. So the general fund and the 4 enterprise funds. These allocations are done based on data around usage of software, numbers of bills of the enterprise funds, other factors that we can count and contribute to it. So this won't change, but the way we account for it will. So to simplify the accounting, basically to kind of eliminate some of that extra work that they've been doing, it's going to save a lot of time for our administrative and accounting staff. We've decided to house all of the expenses in the general fund, but then receive reimbursements quarterly from the enterprise funds. So if you go back to the revenue slides, looking at it from 2024 to 2025, you'll actually see the other revenue increasing at the same rate that these expenses are increasing. So it is evening out, but just wanted to note that. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but wanted to show you our medical claims costs. These are continuing to go up. When I looked back at 2022, we were averaging about 4.25% increases per year. Now we're looking at about 6.4% increases. So these continue to rise steadily, but continuing to rise. Pension costs, I wanted to also just note a little bit. So the costs in the side with police, fire, and NU, which is non-uniformed, those are our pensions, and those are the costs to the city. So those are the costs that we are required to pay. The yellowish bar is the state aid that we receive. So you can see that the state aid has not kept up with the costs for pension in the city, which is some of the reason that we see these increases in these costs. All right, so for the final few minutes here, I want to spend some time looking at some 10-year scenarios based on the 2 budget proposals, and as the mayor mentioned, I want to talk about a 3rd proposal as well. So all of these are scenarios. I just want to emphasize that. We don't know what the next 10 years will bring. We recognize that there's emergencies, drastic economic changes, international pandemics, but I did want to mention that to build these, we actually looked back over the last 15 years, which did include the worst pandemic in the last century, as well as a recession. So again, we don't know what the future holds. These are scenarios, but we're using some historic data to try to make some of these projections. So for the regular budget, this is the scenario based on what we have just said with property taxes. So between now and 2034, 2035, property taxes would need to increase, we're projecting 5 times. So an increase of about 45% from where we are today. There would still be some deficits from year to year impacting our fund balance. And I will say the line maybe to look at on this is the fund balance line. I know there's some red in the line above it, but really looking at the fund balance is, think of it as our savings account. So really our emergency fund. Rule of thumb is that we have 2 to 3 months of operating expenses in that, which actually is around 20 million. So we're a little lower than what we would want to be right now. But at the end of this time, even with a 45% tax increase, we'd be about 3 million in that fund balance. And then just to show the impact to the taxpayers, this is kind of an individual assessment. And this is based on average assessed values of properties. And just to note, the assessed value does not equal the market value. So average assessed value in the city is about 101,000, but that does not mean that that's the market value of the property. And an 8% tax increase, I should have mentioned this earlier, but that's going to generate about $2.7 million for the city. All right, so this is looking at the second scenario that I have been talking about. So this is basically a 0.3% earned income tax increase. And in this scenario, we have not shown another tax increase for 10 years. But as you can see in the fund balance line, that we would run out of funds in 2029. So there would need to be some other either tax increase or some sort of significant change happening in this scenario. And again, this shows the taxpayer's impact in this scenario. Median individual income in the city is about $60,000, a household income is about $60,000. So average resident would see a difference of about $180 per year in this scenario. That's about $350 per week. So we're using 0.3 in our budget proposal. We recognize that very likely we can get through 2025 and 2026 without another increase, but as you can see, eventually we would need to be looking at some sort of increase to taxes. And we had been looking at these 2 years as we were thinking about getting through Mayor Sirachi's administration, and then we dove into some of these longer term projections. And so that's why I want to show you one more scenario. So this scenario shows a 0.5% earned income tax increase this year. This scenario would not mean any change in expenses. So all of the expenses would remain the same. The only thing that would change is the earned income tax line would increase, obviously, and the cash fund balance, so our savings account, would increase slightly this year as well. But as you can see from this scenario, the fund balance actually would remain healthier than any of the other scenarios without any other tax increases in the next 10 years. A 5% increase would generate about $6.6 million in the first year. And then, we're estimating continued increases because incomes continue to rise. This is the scenario I talk about. I told Patrick Hopkins this. I think he's actually watching, so I'll give a shout out to him. But I told him that this is the scenario that I call the power of compounding interest, because if it is increased now, the increases from the income are compounded that much more. And again, just to show the impact to, on average, to taxpayers. So this would mean for this year, about a $300 increase per individual, or around $575 per week. And I think that's all I have.
Well, first, thank you, Mayor Sirachi, for your budget address, and thank you, Director Campbell, for the presentation. Very enlightening. Just one question. Can you go back to the slide that demonstrated the impact on property, if there was a property tax increase on the 101,000 assessed value? I just missed that.
Yep.
That impact on that.
Yeah, there you go.
So that increase would be a $1,200 increase for the year in 2024? Is that, am I right?
No, so the current amount is $1,200. So it would be showing about can't do the math, about $100 for the next increase.
And those would be the steady increases over the next few years, or the next 10 years?
Correct, yeah.
Got it. Thank you. I don't have any additional questions. I'll open it up for the Finance Committee first. Are there any questions from the committee?
If I may, Councilor.
Councilor Diaz?
In regards to some of the LERTA accounts, do you know what has expired that are going to start paying whatever the small percentage will be? Because I know that it's within like 8 years, but I'm sure there's some that are coming up.
Yeah. I'm going to have to say, I'll get that for you for October 12th, because I don't have the expirations in my head, but I will get those for you and have them for October
You'll be able
12th.
to give me like the numbers and the percentage of
Yeah.
how much it would be, the total?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think I do actually have those totals. Let me just see. I didn't include that in the... Those are the totals through 2023, but I'll get you the ones that are expiring then as well, so, yep.
Any questions from full council?
Councilor Roy, if I may.
Councilor Hirsch?
Just a quick question. I noticed looking at, I'm trying to see what page it's on. I think I'm too zoomed in. Yeah, there's a staffing schedule that shows 158 personnel. So I just wanted to ask if this is adjusting the number of uniformed officers, because I know there was recent discussion about reducing the number that we're budgeting for. So I assume that, the 158 is for the department as a whole.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so the 158, so that's 157 or 158, depending on the budget, is for the department as a whole. Last year, there were 190 budgeted for the department, for the police department. So that includes both sworn officers and civilian staff. And I don't have the breakdown in my head, but we will actually have that on a slide on October 12th as well.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
Any other questions from the full council? Any questions from the public? Mr. Studra?
Oh, sorry. You can sit beside me.
This is weird. Tim Stuhlder, One United Lancaster. Two questions. First, you made reference to a slightly different staffing number in the home rule budget versus the regular budget. Could you say what those numbers are?
Yeah, so in the regular budget, we have about 387 full-time staff. It's 386.81, but that's because of the enterprise fund sharing. And then we have 26 part-time staff. And in the home rule budget, it's just slightly higher, 393.5 full-time staff and 28 part-time.
Can you say anything about where those staff, where that difference is in which department?
We can talk in more detail about that on October 12th, but I'll just say that probably the biggest place for that is what Councilor Hirsch just alluded to. We're looking at some staffing shifts in the police department, and so a number of those are coming from the police department. Some of the reductions, I should say. Some of the places that we are, I'll say, keeping or changing staff in the home role piece would be some administrative pieces, so adding an office manager position, or I guess not eliminating that position. And then one of the staff positions would actually be for some of the legal services that I talked about earlier as well.
My other question has to do with the 0.5 percentage point increase in the earned income tax. Given that the administration is apparently proposing potentially an 0.3, what is the role of the 0.5% discussion? Is that a second option for council to consider, something that could happen next year? What's the idea behind that?
Yes, it is a second option for council to consider.
Any other public comment? Director Campbell, in that same vein, will council be presented with a budget with the 0.5% increase to consider? And when could we potentially see that?
Yeah, we can add a summary to the budget booklet showing that. Again, the expenses would not change, so we would not change anything in the actual budget booklet for the expenses, but we can show the revenue change.
Thank you.
Councilor Hirsch? Yes, could I ask one more question? We're on this slide right now with the detail of these projections. Is there like a detailed budget of the increases in the revenues and expenses? And when I say detail, I don't mean like line by line, but just a general idea of like how we see the broader categories of expenditure and revenue kind of changing over time. Is that something your department has? Or I guess maybe my alternative question would be like, how are these projections determined?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer the last question and see if that helps with the. So as I mentioned, we went back over 15 years and looked at historic trends of cost increases. So historically, it's around a little over 3% that costs are increasing each year. And that's what we tried to use basically in the projections. Now, I will say some of the projections include things like debt service, which we know. So some of those knowns are included in here as well. And that's why, for example, you see in 2035 costs actually kind of dip down a little bit, and that's because some of the larger debt servicing is rolling off that year. Is that helpful?
No, that's great.
I can also just weigh in. There is a much more complicated, it's not that complicated, but it has more detail than what is on this slide. And it follows the model that's pretty much at the end of every budget that has ever been introduced in the city, which is the 5-year projections. That shows revenue lines that are broken down by property tax increases, earned income tax increases, et cetera. It also includes a percent assumption of rate of change year over year. So, for example, property taxes are, I believe, a 1% increase year over year. Earned income taxes are a 5% increase over year over year. So that totals, there's a subtotal line for those revenues, and then expenses, it's salary, fringe benefits, and operating expenses, and then those are projected at a rate of change between 3 and 4% typically. And so that is the historic trend data that Director Campbell is talking about. And so there can be provided more of a breakdown of these. But I just want to underscore, these are scenarios based on a set of assumptions in which there's no additional borrowing, and that we are utilizing our history to help predict what revenue increases and what expense increases can be over time for the next 10 years, not being able to see or predict what the future holds specifically, but we know with some confidence what our revenues and expenses are going to be based on decade plus of looking at this. Does that help further?
No, absolutely. Thank you.
I do want to just keep reiterating that these are scenarios. Like, we're saying that there wouldn't be any increases in taxes in this scenario. Really, it's the only one the only scenario that we're seeing that is feasible in, not that it necessarily would happen.
And this is something that, as I'm going around and talking about home rule, I've had one neighborhood meeting last Thursday. I have one tomorrow night and one on Thursday night at the Sheffield Building on the McCaskey campus, and then at the Mix on Thursday night. I'm talking about how this mirrors this scenario, which was information that was provided by the Pennsylvania Economy League, mirrors the many other communities that have adopted home rule, meaning that many other communities that have adopted home rule have not needed to raise earned income tax or property tax after they make an initial adjustment for very long periods of time. And so I share some of that data, and I can share that report with council as well to provide more context for why we are throwing in a third option for council consideration.
Yeah, I think I would like to see that report if possible, just kind of given the gravity of the decision and everything like that.
Any further comment or questions? Great. Thank you, Director Campbell, for the presentation, and again, thank you for the hard work. I know this process in developing multiple budgets has been probably over a year in the making. So just want to thank you for all the hard work in putting this together, and very, very timely information for residents to consider and for council to consider. Thank you. Council President, that concludes the Finance Committee.
Thank you very much, Councilor Arroyo. That concludes our committee business. I'll just quickly remind everyone, finally, that our October 12th budget hearing meeting will begin at 9 a.m. That was a change from previous years, and I want to make sure all the council members are aware that it will begin at 9 a.m. in this room. So having reached the conclusion of our agenda, our clerk's report, Mr. Harris, you have submitted that in writing to the rest of council, is that correct?
I have.
Thank you very much. Having reached the conclusion of our agenda, I will hear a motion to adjourn.
Second.
A motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Everybody enjoy reading your 235 pages of budget.